How many books have you read this year? And be honest, how many of them could you actually explain to a friend right now? Not the title, the actual argument, the actual story. If you are struggling, you're not alone, and you are definitely not the problem you think you are. According to a 2025 YouGov survey, 40% of American adults didn't finish a single book last year. Of the 60% who did, the median was just 2 books for the entire year. We're reading for 15 minutes a day on average, most of it being text and headlines, not books. But the real story isn't the 40% who don't read, it's the 60% who do and still forget almost everything 2 weeks later. So today isn't about reading more, it's about why some people finish a book and carry it for life, while the rest of us finish a book and can barely remember the ending. Before we get into the tips, I want to name the actual problem, because most people frame this as, I just don't read enough. But that's not really the issue for most people. The real issue is something researchers call passive reading. Passive reading is what most of us do by default. You pick up a book, your eyes move across the lines, you reach the end of the chapter, and then you realize you have almost no idea what just happened. You were physically reading, but your brain wasn't actually there. Neuroscience research gives us a clean explanation for why this happens. When we process text only at a surface level, just recognizing the words, we create what scientists call weak memory traces. They form fast and fade fast. But when we engage with the meaning of what we're reading, connecting it to things we already know, asking questions, even just pausing to think, we create what's called deep processing. And deep processing builds strong, lasting memory pathways that stick around. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, but why does this matter? Why should I become a better reader specifically and not just watch more documentaries or listen to more podcasts? That's actually a fair question. And research has a surprisingly strong answer. One study found 6 minutes of reading cut stress levels by up to 68%. More than music, more than walking, more than a cup of tea. Your heart rate drops, your brain gets absorbed in something that isn't your own anxiety. Long term, it gets more serious. A Yale study following over 3,000 adults for 12 years found regular book readers had a 23% lower risk of dying during the study period than non-readers. Reading may genuinely help you live longer. Here's what actually strikes me about all this. We treat exercise, sleep, and diet as health habits. We track them, optimize them, and feel guilty when we skip them. Nobody puts reading in that category, even though the evidence for it is just as strong. And I think the reason is simple. Exercise has a manual. Everyone knows roughly how to work out. Nobody ever taught us how to read well. We learned to decode words in 2nd grade and never got the update. So the rest of this video is that update, the manual nobody gave you. Tip 1, make time and protect it. This sounds almost too obvious, but hear me out, because there's actually a psychological reason why scheduling reading works better than just deciding to read more. When you assign reading to a specific time slot in your day, say 20 minutes every morning or 30 minutes before bed, you're not relying on motivation or willpower in the moment. You're outsourcing the decision to your calendar. Your brain doesn't have to choose between reading and scrolling because you've already made that call in advance. Some of the most committed readers keep 2 reading slots, one in the morning for nonfiction or learning, and one at night for fiction or easier reads. You don't need both, you just need one consistent slot you actually protect. Tip 2, remove the competition. Here's something that probably sounds dramatic, but is backed by behavior research. Having your phone in the same room, even face down, even on silent, measurably reduces your ability to focus on a book. Not because you're checking it, but because part of your brain is still monitoring it. The fix is simple. Move it to another room when you read. Not on the couch next to you, a different room. Researchers found that when people remove devices from the physical space entirely, their ability to stay focused on long-form reading improves significantly. This is also why reading on your phone is so much harder than reading on paper. The same device is also your texts, your social media, and your email. The brain can't fully commit. These 2 are about building the habit. The next 4 are about what to actually do once you're sitting down with the book. Tip 3, read with a pen in your hand. This single habit changes everything about how you process a book. When you hold a pen while reading, not to copy things down, just to underline, circle, write a question mark, write interesting, or wait what in the margin, your brain shifts from receiver mode into responder mode. You're not just absorbing information, you're reacting to it, and that reaction is what creates memory. A useful system: underline things that surprise you, put a question mark next to things you don't fully believe or understand, and put a star next to things you want to come back to. That's it. You don't need a complex annotation method. You just need your brain to be active instead of passive. Tip 4. Use the SQ3R method for nonfiction. This technique was actually developed back in 1946 by a researcher named Francis Robinson, and it has held up remarkably well in modern cognitive science. SQ3R stands for Survey, Question, Read, Recite, and Review. Here's what it looks like in practice. Before you start a chapter, you survey it, skim the headings, subheadings, and the first sentence of each paragraph. Then you turn those headings into questions. So instead of reading a section called The Effects of Sleep, you ask yourself, what are the effects of sleep? What am I about to learn here? Then you read with those questions in mind. After that, you recite, close the book, and try to say out loud or write down what you just learned. And finally, you review, go back and check what you got right and what you missed. This process works because it forces your brain to retrieve the information rather than just recognize it. And retrieval, actually pulling something from memory, is what builds strong, lasting knowledge. Tip 5, read aloud sometimes. This one sounds strange, but there's real science behind it. A 2017 study from the University of Waterloo had participants read material silently, listen to someone else read aloud, listen to a recording of themselves reading, and read aloud themselves. The winner, by a significant margin, was reading aloud. Researchers call this the production effect. When you speak the words, your brain registers the information as something you produced, not just something you received. That distinction matters enormously for long-term memory. You don't need to read entire books aloud, but for a paragraph you really want to remember, a key idea, a quote that landed, try saying it out loud. Tip 6. Use the ghost trace trick. If you find your eyes moving across the page while your mind is somewhere completely different, try this. Take a cap pen, or just your finger, and physically trace along the lines as you read. This forces your visual attention to stay connected to the words. It sounds like a hack for children learning to read, but it genuinely helps adults too, especially when the material is dense or your attention is scattered. It also has a secondary effect. It naturally slows down your reading just enough that comprehension improves. Speed is great. Speed with zero comprehension is just moving your eyes. These 4 techniques are about the mechanics of reading. The last 4 are mindset, and honestly, they might matter more than the techniques. Tip 7. Be okay with confusion. Keep going. One of the biggest reasons people abandon books is hitting a section they don't understand and interpreting that as a personal failure. Here's what actually happens when you hit a confusing part and keep reading anyway. Most of the time, something later in the book explains what confused you earlier. Authors often introduce ideas before they've given you the full context for those ideas. Stopping every time you're confused is like leaving a movie because you don't understand who a character is yet. Trust the process. Mark the confusing part. Keep going and revisit it later. Tip 8. Stretch yourself, but not all the time. There's a version of reading that is genuinely comfortable. Light fiction, magazines, and familiar topics. And there's a version that challenges you. Books that introduce concepts you've never encountered, narratives that demand your full attention, and arguments that don't come easily. Both have value, but if every single book you read is completely effortless, you're not growing. The analogy is gym work. If you never increase the weight, you maintain, you don't build. Try reading at least 1 book per year that feels slightly above your current level, a classic you've always avoided, a dense nonfiction that sounds intimidating. Your comprehension and critical thinking improve exactly because the material demanded more of you. Tip 9. Know when to walk away. Not every book deserves to be finished. This sounds wrong. We're conditioned to believe that quitting is failure, but your reading time is genuinely limited. If you've given a book 50 pages and it has given you nothing back, no new ideas, no enjoyment, no curiosity, put it down. There are too many great books waiting. The only real rule is to be honest with yourself about why you're stopping. Boredom because the book is genuinely bad is different from discomfort because the book is genuinely challenging. The first is a good reason to stop. The second is usually a reason to keep going. Tip 10. Set a goal and tell someone. Research on goal setting consistently shows 2 things. Goals with a specific number attached are more likely to be achieved than vague intentions, and goals you share with someone else are more likely to be kept than private ones. So instead of, I want to read more this year, try, I want to read 12 books this year, 1 per month. Write it down. Tell a friend, make a list of the specific books. The act of choosing in advance means you never waste energy deciding what to read next. You just open the next book on the list. Quick answer to a question I get constantly. Do audiobooks count? Yes, with nuance. A study in the Journal of Neuroscience found the brain processes stories almost identically, whether read or heard. The same networks for language, memory, and imagination. The limitation is annotation and staying in active mode while multitasking. Best combo if you can manage it. Audiobook first for the big picture, physical copy after for what you want to actually keep. As an actual system, pick your slot and protect it. 20 minutes a day is over 100 hours a year or 15 to 20 books. Clear your space, no phone nearby. Read with a pen. For nonfiction, run at least a basic SQ3R. And at the end of every book, spend 5 minutes writing down 3 things you want to remember. Not a summary in 3 things. That single act of retrieval locks in more than almost anything else on this list. Reading is declining across America. 40% of adults didn't finish a book last year. But what reading does for stress, cognitive health, and even lifespan is remarkably well documented. The gap between people who read and forget and people who read and keep it was never talent, it's method. Protected time, no distractions, a pen in hand, active techniques like SQ3R, one hard book a year, permission to quit the bad ones, and one specific goal. Today's Cairn marker: you don't need to read more books. You need to read the same books differently. Start with a pen, a blocked off slot in your day, and a phone in another room, and see how different the same page feels. If breaking down what the research actually says versus what people just repeat online is your kind of thing, that's exactly what MindCairn is here for. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.